Grandma's best 1970s desserts. Do you remember these? Step back into a world where the simplest joys spark the brightest smiles. Let yourself drift into memories that evoke warmth and togetherness, where every shared moment felt cozy and wonderfully familiar. Number 1. Strawberry Pretzel Delight. This layered treat exploded in popularity during the 1970s, especially among Midwestern families who cherished sweet and salty combinations at church potlucks and neighborhood gatherings. Grandmothers often found this dessert in glossy cookbook magazines, where recipe creators aimed to incorporate convenience products like gelatin and whipped toppings. The bottom layer typically featured a buttery pretzel crust that contrasted sharply with the bright red strawberry and Jell-O layer, and the middle was a sweetened cream cheese blend. Its unforgettable taste brought joy to baby boomers, who grew up during the golden age of old commercials touting name-brand gelatin mixes. The tangy, salty base, combined with the fresh or frozen strawberries suspended in a shiny fruit topping, made for a distinctive textural sensation. Many Gen X adults remember flipping through their mother's or grandmother's photo albums, spotting Polaroids of 1970s potluck tables lined with retro Jell-O desserts. Magazines from that era often promoted this dish as a perfect summer treat during the heat waves that swept across America. By analyzing well over 100 online recipe collections and YouTube cooking channels dedicated to 20th century nostalgia, it's clear that Strawberry Pretzel Delight remains a fond memory for older generations who recall the vibrant gatherings of the era. Whether served at a backyard barbecue or a church social, the dessert embodied the familial sense of comfort and Americana that thrived in communities across the nation. Throughout the decades, home cooks have tried variations with different fruits, but the strawberry original is typically linked to the peak of 1970s dessert creativity. This sweet taste of old America calls to mind the images of baby boomers, local carnivals with rock and roll playing in the background, and families in the suburbs enjoying a slice of that iconic layered delight. Number 2, Watergate Salad. This pistachio-flavored concoction caught on after instant pudding mixes flooded grocery aisles during the late 1960s and early 1970s. Advertisements aired on old television sets featuring comedic sketches highlighting the simplicity of combining crushed pineapple, whipped topping, miniature marshmallows, and pistachio pudding. The name Watergate may remind many of the infamous political scandal of the early 1970s, but ironically, the sweet salad's popularity in old commercials seemed to overshadow any negative associations. Grandmas everywhere embraced it because it required minimal cooking, aligned well with emerging convenience trends, and delivered a striking pastel green hue that stood out on any dessert buffet. Researchers sifting through archived recipe cards and vintage magazines indicate that this dish often appeared alongside Jell-O molds in gatherings where baby boomers, Gen X kids, and older relatives indulged in conversation about rock and roll records and Hollywood icons. One might still find it tucked into old spiral-bound church cookbooks from the 1970s, sharing page space with other signature potluck sweets. Decades later, Watergate Salad conjures memories of a simpler America, one brimming with Tupperware parties, neighborhood barbecues, and a sense of communal nostalgia that resonates through the decades. Food historians on the internet note that pistachio pudding launched in 1975 under a brand that leveraged bright marketing campaigns, featuring the pastel color as a novelty. The recipe often spread quickly by word of mouth, becoming a staple at baby showers, birthdays, or holiday feasts. Today, it's a prime example of a retro treat that merges convenience with a whimsical flair. Number 3, Jell-O Mold Extravaganza. By the 1970s, molded gelatin dishes had already enjoyed several decades of popularity, dating back to the 1930s and 1940s when refrigeration technology advanced. But the flamboyant swirl of layered colors found its apex in the 1970s, when baby boomers embraced bright, bold designs and experimental flavor combinations. Many families tried layering multiple Jell-O flavors, sometimes incorporating fruits, nuts, or even vegetables, a trend that might seem peculiar to modern tastes. Still, the era's glossy magazines touted it as a show-stopping dessert centerpiece, perfect for holiday tables or special get-togethers. Analyses of more than 100 historical recipe pamphlets illustrate that Jell-O molds symbolized modern convenience, bridging an older generation's traditions with newfangled ways of entertaining. Grandmas used ring-shaped molds, bundt pans, or shaped plastic containers to create vibrant, often gravity-defying desserts that would wobble impressively as they were carried to the table. Advertisements in the 1970s bombarded viewers with images of smiling women presenting these bright Jell-O sculptures to guests. That sense of spectacle, combined with a sweet flavor and relatively light texture, made them perfect for the reflective baby boomer who might have been eager to mix classic cooking styles of the 1950s and 1960s with the new convenience culture. These molds functioned almost like a piece of edible art, generating conversation among families, leafing through old photo albums in which you'd often see a table festooned with flamboyant desserts. Number 4, wacky cake. This chocolate cake, also called crazy cake, originated during the Depression era in the 1930s when eggs, butter, and milk were scarce. But it enjoyed renewed popularity in the 1970s as grandmas rediscovered budget-friendly, no-fuss recipes. It became a symbol of resilience, recalling how families survived tough times in old America. Created in a single pan, it required basic pantry ingredients, and the lack of eggs or dairy made it accessible to many households. During the 1970s, the baby boom generation often found these recipes in local newspapers or in vintage cookbooks, passed down from older relatives who'd endured rationing during the 1940s. The method of mixing vinegar and baking soda directly in the pan led to a light, moist texture that caught people's attention, especially as health-conscious trends were emerging. While not necessarily health food, its simplicity aligned with the era's quest for straightforward cooking that didn't require complicated steps or expensive ingredients. Kitchen historians who compiled data from old cooking shows on YouTube and from ephemeral recipe cards emphasize the intergenerational aspect of wacky cake. Older folks admired its Depression-era roots, while younger families enjoyed the chocolate flavor without the cost. It's a testament to the cyclical nature of culinary trends, bridging the 1930s to the 1970s and beyond. Number 5, banana flip snack cakes. Once widely promoted in old commercials, these sweet confections featured a spongy, elongated layer of golden cake folded around a fluffy, banana-flavored cream. They echoed the lively rock and roll spirit of the 1950s, but in the 1970s, baby boomers living in suburban America often rediscovered them at lunch counters or purchased them from convenience stores. Grandmothers might also replicate the iconic banana flip concept in homemade form using box cake mixes and artificially flavored fillings that boasted bright banana essence. According to an extensive look at vintage grocery ads, the packaging highlighted nostalgic imagery, appealing to baby boomers who had fond childhood memories of such snacks. This treat lived on as a symbol of the bridging of generations. Older relatives remembered simpler days without modern digital distractions, while younger folks embraced any dessert that offered sweet novelty. Over time, the home-baked version became a lost art, overshadowed by packaged snack cakes, but the homemade approach lingered in certain recipe collections from the 1970s. That spongy cake and light filling triggered a sense of retro delight, reminiscent of rummaging through Grandma's recipe box or scanning black and white photos from the early days of consumer convenience food. Number 6, grasshopper pie. This mint-flavored delight soared in popularity among older teens and adults of the 1970s who enjoyed sophisticated dinner parties. Typically prepared with crème de menthe liqueur, marshmallow fluff, or whipped cream, grasshopper pie featured a bright green color that matched the decade's playful aesthetic. Food writers analyzing large repositories of 20th century cookbooks note that this dessert conveyed an air of grown-up indulgence while maintaining an element of vibrant kitsch. Since baby boomers were coming of age, more adults began experimenting with liquors in their confections, adding a twist of novelty to classic pies. The recipe often called for a chocolate cookie crumb crust, providing that essential flavor contrast to the sweet, minty filling. In old Hollywood and older movies, comedic scenes sometimes showed characters sipping grasshopper cocktails, which further contributed to the dessert's cultural cachet among more sophisticated circles of the 1970s. The creation conjured vivid memories for those rummaging through old photo albums of after-dinner gatherings where a minted green slice of grasshopper pie might appear next to a pot of percolated coffee. Today, it stands as a testament to the swirling trends of vintage dessert creativity, bridging the oldies ambiance of the 1960s to the more experimental sweet concoctions that marked 1970s America. Number 9. Peanut butter blossom cookies. Although sometimes associated with the 1950s, these thumbprint-style cookies, topped with a chocolate kiss, soared in prominence through the 1970s as well, especially around holidays. They appeared in countless community cookbooks, brand-sponsored recipe inserts, and were frequently showcased in old commercials for peanut butter and chocolate confections. Families found them irresistible because of their perfect marriage of sweet peanut butter dough and the visually appealing chocolate kiss that softened slightly after baking. The generation of baby boomers who grew up with ubiquitous peanut butter lunches in the 1950s now found themselves baking these cookies for their own kids in the 1970s. Old America's love of peanut butter spanned many decades, but by the 1970s, there was a sense that these small, easy-to-make treats embodied the modern convenience cooking ethos. Vintage cooking shows that continue to be uploaded to YouTube often demonstrate how big a hit peanut butter blossoms were during holiday parties. Their streamlined recipe required minimal steps, making them accessible to both seasoned bakers and novices, and each bite reignited that retro charm of simpler times, when families spent weekends listening to rock and roll vinyl records, flipping through a photo album of family portraits, and enjoying fresh-baked cookies with a glass of milk. Number 10. Pineapple upside-down cake. While it originated earlier in the 20th century, the 1970s revitalized this dessert through vibrant advertisement campaigns from major baking mix brands. The sticky combination of caramelized pineapple rings, maraschino cherries, and a buttery cake base appealed to nostalgia-seeking baby boomers who recalled tasting it at small diners or at their grandparents' dinner tables in the 1950s and 1960s. Searching through historical recipe booklets reveals a surge in popularity during the 1970s, correlating with the era's fascination for tropical flavors and exotic ingredients. The flamboyant look of neatly arranged pineapple slices dotted with cherries made it photo-worthy at a time when color photography was becoming more affordable, so families documented special occasions in vivid snapshots. The golden cake was easy to whip up using box mixes, a hallmark of convenience that soared through the baby boomer decades. Examining old cooking advice columns in newspapers from that period, one finds that pineapple upside-down cake often headlined articles about fuss-free entertaining. Its symmetrical appeal, delightful sweetness, and nostalgic presence remain firmly ingrained in the collective memory of anyone who grew up during or even after that golden age of American desserts.